LA, your name can turn into a warning before it ever becomes a headline. One small-built 18th Street hitter, known as Crook, moved through parties, backyards, and gang turf like the rules did not apply to him. People saw the chaos, then went quiet. Witnesses froze up, stories changed, and every time the streets tried to swallow the truth, the paper trail kept building behind him. This is not a clean story with clean players. It is a grimy one, powered by respect, fear, and that one question that starts wars. Where you from? You might think you know how these cases go. You do not. Join us as we step into the 18th Street world and track the rise, the bodies, and the courtroom fallout behind Crook's run. William Vasquez, better known on the streets as Crook, grew up in mid-city Los Angeles, south of Adams Boulevard and east of La Brea Avenue. Back in the 1980s, that area was low income, mostly Latino and Black, and it stayed under heavy gang pressure. Crook went to University High School in West Los Angeles, and at that point, he was not yet the full-on hardcore type people later feared. He was more of a tagger, running around with graffiti, theft, and small-time moves that felt like stepping stones. But once he got kicked out of school, everything shifted fast. That was the turning point where he went from messing around to jumping all the way in, joining the 18th Street gang, specifically the Alsace clique. And the streets around him were already setting the stage for something uglier. Before Crook was even known like that, the war that shaped his name was already heating up. In the mid-1990s, an 18th Street clique on Ursula Avenue tried to sell drugs in territory controlled by the Black P-Stone Bloods, based in the Jungle's housing projects. The Black P-Stones warned them straight up that they were not allowed to work that spot, but the Ursula Avenue clique kept pushing anyway. That disrespect did not slide. The Black P-Stones came down hard, pressuring them and attacking them until it turned into a survival situation. And once it hits that level, it stops being about money and starts being about pride and revenge, and that is when the streets start collecting bodies. To keep Ursula from getting wiped out, the Rancho Park clique of 18th Street stepped in as backup. Rancho members started shooting at the Black P-Stones, and that made the whole thing explode into full-blown war. The Black P-Stones responded by shooting up Ursula Avenue over and over, day and night, until the 18th Street members had to flee. Ursula members ran into Rancho Park territory, and from there the retaliation got even nastier. Rancho allegedly started shooting at any black person they saw, including students near Dorsey High School. It was reckless and constant, the kind of street chaos where nobody feels safe and the next move is always worse than the last. Eventually, the violence got so wild it could not keep going the same way. The Rancho clique ended up being absorbed into the Alsace clique, which was about a mile north. That merger mattered because it did not just shuffle names around. It created a group that was deeply hostile and revenge-driven toward the Black P-Stones, with fresh anger and old scores mixed together. So when Crook later became active, he was stepping into a situation where the beef was already written in blood. And once you inherit a war like that, you are not joining a neighborhood group anymore. You are joining a mission. By 1999, Crook was fully active, and the conflict between 18th Street, the Black P-Stones, and later the Rolling 20s. Bloods was deep in shootout mode. Crook made the Black P-Stones and the Rolling 20s his main targets, and he wanted to terrorize the jungles on purpose. He would drive through enemy turf in a black Monte Carlo, letting off shots with a semi-automatic handgun like it was routine. On one occasion, he allegedly shot a Black P-Stone member and the man's mother. The mother survived, but the Black P-Stone member died. About a week later, Crook allegedly came back again and shot another Black P-Stone member in the ankle as the target ran. It turned into a cat and mouse war, Crook sliding through, striking, and somehow avoiding the clapback. He was only 5'5", but he stayed elusive, and he became the top shooter on his side. The Black P-Stones got so fed up, they started tagging his name on walls and actively hunting him, and that is when you know the streets are treating you like a real problem. Because the Rolling 20s Bloods were allies of the Black P-Stones, they became enemies of 18th Street automatically. Now it was not just one beef, it was connected beef, and shootings bounced back and forth through West Adams and Mid-City like the neighborhood had no off switch. Crook leaned into that energy, even tattooing BK on his body, and he was hunting for victims. The area south of Adams and west of La Brea turned into a constant war zone. The Black P-Stones killed several 18th Street members, but Crook kept slipping through the cracks and coming back. By this point, the paranoia was part of his lifestyle. He slept every night with a gun in his hand, like he already knew the next knock could be the last. To understand how someone like Crook becomes that guy, you have to understand what 18th Street is. The 18th Street Gang, also known as Barrio 18 or just 18, started in the Rampart district of Los Angeles in the 1960s, formed by Mexican Americans and other immigrant youths who were not accepted into existing Hispanic gangs like Clanton 14. When the idea of a new clique got rejected, the split helped create 18th Street, and the rivalry with Clanton stayed bitter. What made 18th Street different is that it opened its ranks wider than most gangs did. It became multi-ethnic and spread into many areas, operating through a network of separate cliques under the same banner. It is described as one of the biggest and most violent street gangs, and it is known for crimes like drug dealing, robberies, shootings, extortion, and homicide. And when a gang has that kind of reach, a shooter from one clique can start moving like he has an army behind him, even if he is only 5 at 5. 18th Street is described as strict, with rules enforced through punishments like an 18-second beating, and worse for serious violations. The culture is heavy on identity too, with members using symbols like 8 in Roman numerals, X8, and Mi Vida Loca in graffiti and tattoos, and wearing certain team gear as a signal. One description calls them a children's army, because recruitment can start young. In one example, a recruiter talked about scouting middle schools for kids around 11 to 13, first using fear, then switching to a fake friendly approach, selling the gang like it is protection and excitement. Another story showed that same pull from the inside, where a kid said, 18 is the best. We have more respect and the most backup, and then admitted the mindset that keeps the cycle going. We're not supposed to feel for them. That line says everything about how the streets train people to shut off empathy, because once you feel, you hesitate, and hesitation gets you caught lacking. And when Crook jumped in after getting expelled, he was stepping into that exact kind of machine. The Black Pea Stones are tied into the Bloods Alliance, especially the Peru side, and they have been in a long-running conflict with 18th Street, which is based north of Baldwin Village. That detail matters because it explains why the jungles were such a flashpoint. When you have gangs with strong alliances and deep neighborhood identity, one move in the wrong territory can kick off a chain reaction. That is what happened with Ursula Avenue. That is what pulled Rancho into the mix, and that is what eventually shaped the Alsace clique into something revenge-driven. So by the time Crook started doing ride-throughs in that Black Monte Carlo, the streets were already trained to respond with war, not warnings. And that war energy was not done expanding yet, because another rival on the west side had its own history and its own reason to hate. Another major rival of 18th Street is Santa Monica 13, also known as SMG, based in Santa Monica's Pico neighborhood. Their roots go way back, starting as the Santa Monica Tomato Patch Gang in the late 1920s, and later becoming known as Santa Monica 13, with a reputation for violence connected to the era after the Mexican Mafia formed in the 1950s. They marked territory through graffiti like SMG, SM13, and SMX3, and the SM17 reference points to their main subset, Santa Monica 17th Street. Over time, cliques came and went, with names like Pee Wee Locos and Little Locos still being mentioned as active, while other clique names faded out. This matters because it shows Crook was not just operating in a simple two-sided beef. The 18th Street world had multiple enemies, multiple borders, and multiple reasons for the next situation to pop off. And once we step into what happens next, Crook's name stops being just a local problem and starts sounding like a warning. On January 27, 2002, the streets tied Crook's name to a deadly backyard party where Selena Redondo saw her friend Alex Haro. The vibe was normal until people started slipping into the yard through a side gate, and then the whole place flipped. Guests began running, and Redondo realized they were trying to get away from a man in a baseball hat who she later identified as Crook. She said he walked in calm, with a gun down at his side like he already knew the yard belonged to fear. Redondo made eye contact and ran toward the house, and as she got inside, she heard about 6 to 9 gunshots. She did not talk to police that night, and that silence is part of what keeps cases cold. Weeks later, she saw Crook again while working at an In-N-Out drive-thru, sitting in the passenger seat like he was testing her reaction, and she panicked and left the window. About a week and a half after that, he showed up again, walked inside, and she had to take his order at the counter, then step away until he left. When she finally met detectives on May 22, 2002, and viewed a photo lineup, she picked Crook as the man with the gun at the party, and she admitted she held back details at first because he had already popped up at her job twice. But that was just one witness's fear, because the backyard had more eyes on it. Another guest, Cesar Navarro, said he knew Haro from high school, and they were catching up when 2 males walked toward the back of the yard. One rushed in hot, angry, and disrespectful, yelling "Caca City," and then went straight at a young kid wearing a hat with the letter C, knocking it off like a public diss. Haro stepped in to defend the youngster and socked the aggressive male, and that is when Navarro said the gun came out and the shooter started unloading inches away from Haro. After the first burst, the crowd scattered. Navarro froze, then he heard 2 more gunshots. Navarro described the shooter as not tall, about 5 to 5'6", really thin, with a light mustache, wearing a baggy charcoal gray hoodie and a fitted navy blue Yankee hat. When police interviewed Navarro and showed him a six-pack lineup, he circled Crook and wrote that he looked like the suspect wearing that fitted New York hat while shooting toward Harrow, and he said he was 100% sure at the time. Erica Diaz also described a male screaming, "Who's from Caca?" slapping the hat off someone's head, then gunfire, and later she picked Crook from a photo lineup as looking like that same male. Evidence at the scene included casings from different calibers, and the autopsy said Harrow was shot 3 times, including one to the back of the head, with stippling showing a close-range shot. Crook's name was starting to float through different mouths, but the streets were about to show how fear also makes people disappear. On January 26, 2003, Crook's name showed up again, this time inside apartment 201 on Glendon Avenue, where Lisa Bracino was partying with friends and 3 males, including Crook. People were drinking and using drugs, and after hours, Bracino saw Crook standing in the living room, clicking 2 guns like he could not relax. A helicopter flew overhead, and he seemed paranoid, thinking someone called the police. Bracino tried to calm him down, went to the kitchen, made soup to sober him up, and when she brought it out, Crook pointed a gun at her and told her not to come closer. Then he started pointing both guns at the others, sitting on 2 couches, and Bracino heard a gunshot and saw one male holding his shoulder, bleeding. The parties later stipulated that the man who got hit was Donnell Kipp. Right after that, Crook forced the situation even further, telling Bracino she was going to drive him somewhere. She offered him her car, but he demanded she take him, and at gunpoint, he marched the group outside to her car. Bracino could not drive, so one of her friends drove to where Crook wanted to be dropped off, and once he got out, the wounded man was taken to the hospital. Bracino did not call police, and that tells you how deep the fear ran, even when someone got shot right in front of you. Later, police came to her home and she told them what happened, and about a year later, she identified Crook from a photo lineup as the shooter. Candy Betancourt and Ruth Betancourt backed up that Crook shot Kipp, but they also admitted they were scared because they believed it was gang-related, and that pattern was building. Shots, panic, silence, and then a name. By December 3rd, 2003, the war energy was right on the surface in Rolling 20s territory. Mark Brown, a Rolling 20s member, was standing outside a residence on LaSalle Avenue, a known spot where the homies kick it at, and he believed his gang controlled that area. Brown saw a male jogging toward him, and he identified that male as Crook. A girl came up asking Brown for $1. Brown reached into his pocket, his keys dropped, and when he bent down, he saw a black object close to his face, a gun. Brown threw his hands up and grabbed Crook's wrist. They struggled, and Brown said Crook kept pulling the trigger until Brown got hit in the shoulder. The gun fell. Brown dove under a nearby car, and Crook picked the gun back up and kept firing while shouting "fuck slobs," a disrespect word aimed at blood gang members, including Rolling 20s. After about 5 to 6 shots, Crook took off. Brown later identified Crook in a photo lineup, and he also identified him at a live lineup. Another witness, Sheba Robinson, described how earlier that day a red vehicle she believed was an Acura stopped near her with 4 Hispanic males inside. The driver asked, "Hey, do you know where any 20s are at?" And one male stood out in her mind. Later that same night, she heard gunshots. Someone knocked. She opened the door, and Brown collapsed on her living room floor. She called 911, and even though she only spoke to police much later and said she was 50% sure, her detail about that red car made the night feel like a setup. And the craziest part is, the same night was not even done. That same evening, only a quarter to a half mile away, another Rolling 20s member named Kevin Walton was shot. The timeline was tight, the kind that makes detectives look at it like a quick run-through. A 911 call for Brown came in at 6:17 p.m., and another 911 call reporting Walton's shooting came in about 2 minutes later. Walton's body was found close enough that it took about 1 minute to travel between the locations by car. Detectives found .9mm cartridge casings in the street near Walton, and the autopsy said Walton had 3 gunshot wounds, one to the neck, one to the jaw, and one to the knee, with the neck and jaw wounds being fatal. The prosecution view of this night was that Crook was in the process of trying to eliminate as many rivals as possible, and gang expert testimony said shootings like this were meant to benefit the gang by building a reputation and gaining respect. The forensic work connected Brown and Walton to the same gun, showing how the same heat followed from one location to the next, like a moving storm. And while the street sees it as putting in work, the paper trail sees it as a pattern, the kind that turns a nickname into a case file. But the story does not stay stuck in 2003, because by 2005, Crook's name shows up in a scene that goes national. On the evening of March 5, 2005, Santa Monica officers and paramedics responded to reports of a shooting at the Moose Lodge on Ocean Park Boulevard at 16th Street. It was a birthday party night, and inside the main hall, Jonathan Hernandez and Hector Bonilla ended up on the floor, shot multiple times. Outside of the court paperwork, the public report says Hernandez was shot 17 times at close range, hit in the head, shoulder, and chest. And when Bonilla, 25, ran to help him, Bonilla got dropped too, with multiple shots to the head. Police estimated over 24 shots were fired, and right away detectives felt it had to be more than one shooter because there were too many bullets spent too fast. In the courtroom version, witnesses described a fight breaking out, chairs being raised, and then the sound of gunfire like firecrackers. Multiple people described one shooter in a red shirt and a red baseball cap, and another shooter also firing, with victims being shot even while lying on the floor. The room was not well lit, and that mattered, because darkness is where fear lives. Witnesses also described Santa Monica gang members at the party yelling out their territory and waving bandanas on the dance floor. That is the kind of atmosphere where one wrong look can turn into a full-on crash out. And in the middle of that chaos, several witnesses kept circling back to the same detail: the red outfit that was really hard not to miss. One of the strongest threads in the Moose Lodge case was how many people remembered Crook as Willie, and how that red outfit kept sticking in their minds. Imelda Martinez was at the party for her brother Ruben's birthday, and she said she knew Crook, that he had stayed at her home sometimes and was a friend of Ruben. She described his long-sleeve shirt as blood red and said she did not remember anyone else wearing that same type of red. When the shooting started, she dropped toward the floor, looked up, saw something red, and her first thought was that Willie was the shooter. She said the red shirt stood out because others were more dressed up, and she saw the arm of the person in red angled downward as shots were being fired. Later, on July 25, 2005, she identified Crook's photo and wrote, "This is Willie, the one I saw at the party wearing a red shirt." Ruben also said Crook stood out because he wore a red shirt and a red cap, and Ruben even told police he was shocked Crook would wear that when Bloods were the enemy, saying Crook must have had the balls that big to do something like that. But Ruben also admitted the street rule out loud, basically saying if you talk, you get taken out, and he did not want to be in court. Salvador Ramirez said he saw Willie in a red shirt and red baseball cap and exchanged greetings with him, and later picked Crook from a photo lineup too. Other guests gave similar looks-like identifications tied to the red shirt and red hat, and even the ones who hesitated did not sound calm, they sounded scared. And in a case like this, fear is not background noise, it is the main soundtrack. The Moose Lodge accounts also kept circling around the idea of two shooters working together. Diana Estrada and her boyfriend Cuauhtémoc said they saw two men shooting, with one in red shirt firing at a man on the floor, while another wore a white shirt and jeans. Diana said she focused more on the man in red, describing him as light-skinned Hispanic, late teens to early 20s, small mustache, between 5'3" and 5'6", and not heavy. She circled Crook's photo and wrote that it resembled the one who shot the older victim, the one with the red shirt, but she also admitted in another proceeding she had been unable to identify the shooters. Ramon Mendoza, who was near the stage, first described one shooter, then later admitted there was a second shooter too, and in court, he identified Crook as the second shooter, describing him as about 5'5" to 5'6" with a stocky build, shorter and heavier than the first shooter. Mendoza admitted he was scared to name the man in red at first because he seemed like the leader of the group involved in the fight. Crispin Yanez gave an even more direct story in his detective interview, saying the guests were on the floor so he had a clear view of Crook shooting at an individual, and he described Crook walking toward a victim already down and continuing to shoot. Yanez later tried to take it back at trial, claiming he lied to tell detectives what they wanted, but the record also shows he circled Crook's photo and wrote that he saw him shooting at the guy in the Moose. Yanez cried when subpoenaed, fled to Arizona, got brought back on a warrant, and repeatedly expressed fear for his family. That back and forth is not confusion, it is pressure. And once the case moved from street talk to the DA's desk, the pressure turned into something heavier: warrants. After the Moose Lodge shooting, the early vibe was that the shooters might never be identified. Witnesses were hard to lock in, leads were few, and it looked like it could fade into the pile. But on July 29th, Santa Monica Police Department detectives presented a completed investigation to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. After review, the DA filed charges and issued felony arrest warrants for 3 suspects connected to the murders of Hector Bonilla and Jonathan Hernandez. The department said the investigation was built from many pieces, including evidence collected at the scene and witness statements of identification. One suspect, Jose Majaro, 21, went into custody, while 2 stayed at large. Police identified the outstanding suspects as William Vasquez, also known as Crook, 25, and Hector Hugo Sanchez, also known as Enemy, 20, who also used the name Eric Nunez. All 3 were said to be members of the 18th Street Gang in Los Angeles. The charges included 2 counts of murder with special circumstances, gang enhancements, and use of firearms during a gang crime, with penalties described as life without parole or the death penalty, plus assault with a deadly weapon. And once charges were filed, police said those warrants hit the national database, meaning if Crook got stopped for something as small as speeding in another state, his name could pop up. That is when a street name stops being local. But Crook did not just vanish quietly. The record shows he kept moving like the streets could not touch him. On September 23, 2005, another outdoor birthday party on 21st Street turned into another shooting tied to Crook. Raimundo Ortiz said he left the party to urinate in a nearby alley with his friend Santiago Rosales. After Ortiz finished and waited, a black SUV pulled up, and someone inside asked a third person standing nearby, later identified as Jesse Becerra, where he was from. Becerra replied, "Santa Monica," and Ortiz said he immediately felt something bad was coming because somebody just doesn't reply and respond another hood or whatever unless they are really from there. And Ortiz knew they were not in Santa Monica at that moment. The SUV pulled away, and shortly after, Ortiz saw a person running toward them firing a weapon. Ortiz believed it was the same person who asked the question. Becerra fell. Ortiz and Rosales hit the ground. Ortiz got shot in the leg, and the shooter ran past and kept firing at Becerra's head while he lay on the sidewalk. When Ortiz later viewed a photo lineup, he circled Crook's photo and wrote that it could be number 2. It looked like his face, though he admitted he was not 100% sure at the preliminary hearing. Rosales also said the shooter was the same person who asked where Becerra was from, even though Rosales picked someone else in a photo lineup earlier. Forensics found many cartridge casings near Becerra, and the autopsy said he suffered 20 gunshot wounds, with 9 to the back of the head. That kind of overkill is not random. It is a message. And as the bodies stacked, Crook's ego in custody would later sound just as loud as the gunfire. On October 13, 2005, Crook finally got caught during a parole search connected to Daniel Mendez, an associate tied to the Alsace clique of 18th Street. Between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., a team including the parole officer knocked at a 4th-floor apartment, heard people moving inside the apartment complex where he lived in the Westlake district. It was not a casual pickup. It was the FBI and Los Angeles police working it together. After they got in, they noticed a window situation. A lieutenant pulled the curtain back, opened the window, and saw Crook crouched on the windowsill like he was trying to ghost the whole building. The lieutenant grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him inside. When they searched Crook, they found a holster on his waistband holding a fully loaded .226 Sig Sauer handgun, and in his pockets were 3 loaded magazines and a baggie with loose rounds. At first, an officer thought he was Mendez. Then another officer looked and said, "You're Willie Vasquez, aren't you?" Crook answered, "My name is William. You guys have been looking for me for a long time, haven't you?" Then he went into full street mode, saying he knew someone snitched. "A snitch. I hate a snitch." And he warned, "You just remember it's you guys' fault somebody's going to die." As they escorted him out, he shouted, "All snitches. I hate rats. The rats. Alsace. Alsace." That is not a man acting confused. That is a man acting like the badge is the enemy and the street code is the only law. And once he got in the car, the arrogance got even louder. After Crook was arrested, detectives described him as boisterous and arrogant, talking like he wanted his reputation on record. In the car, he said, "I'm the best." At the station, he commented on officers' weapons, calling them weapons, and said he was proficient with guns because he practiced, claiming he preferred an HK or SIG. He also said he had angels tattooed on his head because he was a dark angel, and photos later showed gang tattoos on his body, including an 18th Street tattoo with the letter A above it, standing for Alsace. Gang officers testified that Crook was a self-admitted member of the Alsace clique, and they explained how in 18th Street culture, respect is everything, and putting in work raises your status, while disrespect can lead to murder. They also laid out how rival gangs around them, including Santa Monica Trees, Rollin' 20s, and Culver City, were all in the mix, and how shootings like the Moose Lodge incident were viewed as gang members acting together to benefit the gang. Forensics tied key scenes to specific firearms, including the Moose Lodge casings being fired from 2 weapons, and tests showing links between casings from different shootings. And when this case finally hit the appellate record, it described Crook being convicted by a jury of multiple first-degree murders, attempted murder, and assaults with a semi-automatic firearm, plus gang and firearm findings, leading to multiple life without parole terms and additional time stacked on top. That is where the street story turns into a legal nightmare, and it is also where people start asking the question Crook hated most: who talked, who folded, and who was next to get silenced. Once they finally had him, the courtside moved fast. Vasquez pleaded not guilty Tuesday to 3 murder charges, and he was held on $2 million bail. Authorities also said a third suspect, Hector Hugo Sanchez, 26, was still being sought. And while the public saw an arrest headline, the people closest to the streets saw something else, the start of a courtroom war where snitch talk, fear, and old grudges were going to shape everything that came next. When the murder trial opened in downtown LA, the vibe was described like this. Vasquez sat between two lawyers, wearing a blue dress shirt with a tie hanging awkwardly past his waistline, looking nothing like his mugshot. In that mugshot, he was shirtless, and the word 18 was tattooed across his chest. Prosecutors used that image as a signal, like a stamp of loyalty to the 18th Street gang. He was charged with 5 murders and 3 other shootings between 2002 and 2005, including the killing of the 2 Santa Monica men at the Moose Lodge party. This was framed as a 3-year crime run, and prosecutors said the filing included 5 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of premeditated murder, and 7 counts of discharging a firearm, causing great bodily injury. Deputy District Attorney Sarika Kim told the jury the whole point of Vasquez's brutality was respect and fear, and she said that fear would be pervasive in this trial and that it would show up in different ways. The warning was clear. Some witnesses who once talked might not want to speak in open court. Others might pull back from their earlier statements. That is not just courtroom drama. In gang cases, that is the pressure. People remember what happens to snitches. People remember who gets blamed when a set takes a hit. And once the jury hears that fear is part of the case, they start watching every witness like a person trying to survive, not just a person trying to tell the truth. In the Moose Lodge killings, prosecutors painted a clean story of how it started. They said Mojaro, Eric Nunez, and Vasquez showed up uninvited. They said an argument broke out between the men and Hernandez while they were at the bar. Bonilla allegedly stepped in when things got heated, and then the shooting started. Prosecutors said the 2 victims were shot a total of 25 times, including several times in the back as they lay dying on the floor. That detail was not shared to be polite. It was shared to show cruelty, to show intent, to show that this was not panic shooting. It was the kind of blasting that sends a message, the kind of putting in work that tells every rival in earshot, this is what happens when you clash with the wrong crew. And once that picture is set in the jury's head, the next fight becomes the defense's only move. Break the witnesses, break the identifications, and break the link to Crook. One of the wildest details the jury heard came from Los Angeles police detective Jeff Hoffmeyer talking about what happened right after Vasquez was arrested. Hoffmeyer testified that after being handcuffed, Vasquez started talking like he was proud of it. He said, "I know someone snitched on me. Just remember, it's your guys' fault. Somebody's going to die." That quote is pure street mindset, the kind of talk that mixes ego with warning. He is not saying he is scared. He is saying he is a problem. He is saying he knows how this game works. Somebody talked, and now somebody is going to pay. In a gang case, a statement like that does 2 things at once. It makes him look guilty to people who already believe the prosecution, and it reminds everyone else why witnesses hesitate, why stories change, why people suddenly don't remember. Because if the defendant is saying somebody's going to die, the whole room knows he is not talking about a parking ticket. And that is where the tension tightened, because the case still had to prove who fired, not just who talked tough. Vasquez's lawyers came out pushing one main idea: do not trust the prosecution's people. They told the jury to question credibility because many witnesses had inconsistent statements and criminal histories. One defense lawyer, John Daly, described a key prosecution witness as a regular informant in murder cases who likes to get paid for what he does. The defense also said other witnesses were on drugs during the incidents. That strategy is common in gang trials because the streets do not produce clean witnesses. You get people who party, people who hustle, people who have records, people who were present for the chaos, not present for a quiet conversation. But the prosecution was ready for that too. They said the main physical evidence would come through expert testimony, tying bullets recovered from 2 crime scenes to the same gun. They also planned to argue tattoos on Vasquez's arms, including Twink's Killer and BK, which prosecutors said stood for Blood Killer, were references to gang-motivated crimes he was accused of. So the fight became this: the defense trying to make every witness look shaky, and the prosecution trying to make the whole case feel like one violent pattern that keeps pointing back to one name. On appeal, Vasquez argued the trial. Court messed up by allowing the Santa Monica Moose Lodge killings to be joined with other crimes that took place in Los Angeles. He said joining unrelated crimes from different times and places was so prejudicial, it violated due process. The court said no. The legal point was that Section 954 allows offenses of the same class to be consolidated, and for crimes to be connected together, there must be a common element of substantial importance. The court said the common element here was clear. Each charged murder involved gang members being gunned down in public, and the intent behind them was to eliminate rivals. The opinion said motivation can be the connecting thread, and here it was, the same kind of motive across the murders. The court also said the defense had the burden to clearly establish enough prejudice to require separate trials. Then it walked through factors like whether the evidence would inflame the jury, whether weak cases were being propped up by strong ones, and whether the joinder turned it into a death penalty situation. The court's bottom line was simple. The joined murders did not create gross unfairness, and the trial court did not abuse discretion. In street terms, the court was saying, you do not get to slice this story into safer pieces. If the pattern is the point, the jury gets to hear the pattern. Vasquez argued the Moose Lodge killings were so brutal they would poison the jury against him on everything else. The court did not buy it. It acknowledged the Santa Monica shootings were brutal, but it compared them to other charged murders in the case. It said the murder of Jesse Becerra was equally heinous. He suffered 20 gunshot wounds, including 9 to the back of the head, and witnesses said the shooter kept firing as Becerra lay on the pavement. It also described Alex Harrow being shot 3 times at point-blank range, twice in the torso and once in the back of the head, because he defended a young man the shooter had assaulted. The court's message was that the Santa Monica murders were no more violent and senseless than some of the other charged murders, so they did not unduly inflame the jury. That is a cold comparison, but it shows what this case was really about. It was not one ugly night. It was a run of shootings the system saw as connected by gang motive and public executions. And once the court frames it that way, it becomes harder for the defense to argue the jury should see the Moose Lodge case as some isolated storm instead of part of a larger, darker wave. A major piece of the appeal was about eyewitness identification, especially the photo process with Cesar Banuelos. Vasquez claimed the photo array was suggestive because witnesses said one suspect wore a bright red shirt. He argued detectives showed Banuelos a six-pack and told him to concentrate on the suspect described as wearing a bright red shirt, and only then did Banuelos pick Vasquez. The court said Vasquez did not meet the burden of showing the procedure was unduly suggestive. It said the detective told Banuelos to concentrate on the individual with the bright red shirt, but they did not suggest anyone in the lineup was that person, and they did not hint Vasquez's photo was the one to choose. The court added that even if the procedure had been suggestive, Banuelos' identification was reliable because he had prior contacts with Vasquez and had seen him in the neighborhood. On top of that, the record described other Moose Lodge witnesses saying the shooter at the party wore a bright red shirt and a baseball hat, and that is what Vasquez wore. Several witnesses also said they did not recall anyone else dressed like that, so the case leaned on a simple street detail, and the whole legal fight became whether that detail helped witnesses remember the truth or pushed them toward the name detectives already wanted. Another fight was about 4 witnesses who did not show up to court-ordered live lineups: Carlos Diaz, Selena Redondo, Erica Diaz, and Sheba Robinson. The defense tried to get identifications excluded because of that failure. The trial court refused, saying there was no authority to do it, and later decided a cautionary instruction would handle the issue. The court updated the instruction and told jurors that because some witnesses skipped the physical lineup, their eyewitness identifications could be less reliable and should be viewed carefully. Vasquez argued that was too mild, and it rewarded the prosecution for not ensuring attendance. The reviewing court said the trial court had discretion to choose a remedy short of exclusion, and it pointed to similar instructions approved in other cases. It also said the Constitution does not require exclusion of eyewitness testimony as punishment for a witness failing to attend a lineup. The key point was this: the jury still had to decide how strong those identifications were. In other words, instead of throwing out the street voices, the court told the jury to listen carefully, knowing some of those voices never stepped into the lineup room when they were supposed to. Before trial, the parties learned cartridge casings from the Donnell Kipp and Mark Brown scenes were destroyed, though photos remained. The defense tried to exclude testimony about those casings, but the motion was denied. The prosecution's ballistics expert, Star Sachs, had examined the Kipp and Brown casings before they were destroyed. She compared them to other evidence and concluded the Walton and Brown casings were fired from the same gun. She also had access to casings from the Reddix incident and concluded that casings from Kipp, Walton, and Reddix were fired by the same weapon. The defense worried the jury would assume Reddix was a homicide and assume Vasquez did it, even though he was not charged for that. The prosecution said they could keep the details of the Reddix shooting out of the trial, and the court allowed the evidence. Officers explained why casings were destroyed in non-homicide cases if no special holds were placed. The defense argued that would make jurors guess Reddix was a homicide because those casings were not destroyed. The court said that was speculation, and it pointed out other reasons evidence can be destroyed or preserved. It also noted jurors learned weapons do not always stay with one gang or one person, because the gun used to kill Alex Harrow was found years later in the possession of gang members not connected to the case. The story here is sharp. The case wanted the gun link, but it did not want the jury to start convicting Vasquez in their minds for a killing he was not even charged with, and that tightrope only made the whole trial feel even more tense. When the court reviewed the evidence, it described how multiple witnesses tied Vasquez to the Moose Lodge shootings. and how several of them had identified him earlier. Vasquez argued the room was dark and crowded, lit only by dim lamps on a few tables, so witnesses could not really see. The court's response was basically, that was for the jury, and an appeal court does not reweigh credibility. For the murder of Alex Haro, Julian Navarro and Erica Diaz identified Vasquez as the shooter after photo lineups, and other witnesses said Vasquez was armed as he went into the backyard where the shooting happened. Navarro later identified someone else at a lineup years later, but he had selected Vasquez's photo less than a month after the shooting and was certain at the time. The point was that the jury had enough to believe Crook was not just around these scenes. He was the one doing the blasting, and that belief set up everything that followed. During the second penalty trial, after arguments finished on November 1st, 2011, the prosecutor told the court the office received a letter from someone identifying himself as Jose Mojaro, a co-defendant in the Moose Lodge shootings who had been convicted in a separate trial. Defense counsel said he had received the letter too, dated October 12, 2011, and he read it into the record. The letter said, "I killed Richard Haro on Westview Boulevard. I seek no sympathy or any type of sympathetic treatment. I shot him 3 times, twice in the chest, once in the head. Sincerely, Jose Mojaro." The court recessed. Then the jury was instructed and began deliberations. On November 3, 2011, defense counsel said he had thought about the note and the delay in turning it over, and he brought a motion for mistrial, saying he had no idea about the substance or materiality of Mojaro's claim. The court denied the mistrial motion. On appeal, Vasquez tried to frame it like a new trial request, arguing the court should have treated it as newly discovered evidence, but the reviewing court said that is not what happened. Trial counsel never moved for a new trial on the guilt phase, never cited the new trial statute, and never argued for a fresh guilt determination. The court's stance was strict. If you do not make the motion, the court cannot be blamed for not granting it. So that letter landed like a grenade, but legally, it did not stop the train. And in a case built on who shot who, that kind of late confession only makes the whole story feel even more dangerous because it raises a hard question. Who was really willing to carry what on their name, and why now? After all the fighting in court, the result did not change. Vasquez ended up with life without parole, and the California Supreme Court denied review, meaning the lifelong sentence would stand. Crook was convicted of 5 murders. He was suspected in 15 additional murders, but prosecutors only secured convictions for 5. Although the prosecution sought the death penalty, 2 juries did not return a death verdict, and he narrowly avoided it by only 2 votes during sentencing. Crook grinned as a victim's mother called him a monster. The Mexican King Von received 5 terms of life without the possibility of parole, 140 years to life and 16 additional years, with the sentences to run consecutively. The report described a run of murders between 2002 and 2005, including the Moose Lodge killings and other shootings in Los Angeles. It also described how prosecutors leaned on ballistics links, witness identifications, and the gang motive running through the cases. Even years later, a 2015 report about the FBI Fugitive Task Force said Vasquez was wanted for as many as 20 homicides. That same report called him extremely violent and described the task force mindset. They chase an all-star team of jerks wanted for serious crimes, and they do not give up. But the wildest part of the capture story is the one you already flagged. When officers arrived and he was arrested, he told officers, "You guys were lucky I'm afraid of heights. Otherwise, I would have shot it out." That is not just a quote. That is a mindset. And the moment you picture him on that ledge, clutching the wall, armed and still talking reckless, you can feel exactly why this case is being framed the way it is. And that's the part people miss when they talk about a name like Crook. They picture one man, one trigger, one headline. But the real story is how reputation grows legs, how a crew's rules turn a city into a map of pressure points, how a short figure can cast a long shadow when fear does the heavy lifting for him, because every scene you heard has the same fingerprints. The sudden disrespect, the switch from party to panic, the silence that follows, witnesses who know what they saw, but also know what it costs to say it out loud, a system trying to stitch chaos into a pattern, and a defendant who doesn't just deny it, he performs, like the courtroom is another block where you can't look weak. That's why this case hits different, not because the numbers sound shocking, but because the mindset behind them is so clear. When someone believes the street code is the only law, everything becomes a test. Every stare, every rumor, every who's from where. And once that mindset spreads, it doesn't stay in one party hall or one apartment. It travels, it multiplies, it recruits. So here's the question that lingers when the cameras shut off and the transcripts go quiet. Was Crook simply a violent outlier, or the perfect product of a machine that rewards brutality like it's a promotion? And now we want to hear from you. Do you think fear is what really keeps gangs powerful, more than money, guns, or numbers? In a case like this, can eyewitnesses ever be reliable, or are they trapped between survival and truth? If the system says it's a pattern, where do you draw the line between evidence and assumption? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.